Shalom Aleichem and welcome back everyone as we are preparing for Shabbat Parshat Matot Masei. Let's look at the Parasha and see some of the important lessons that we can apply to our lives from the Parasha. In this week's Parasha we learn about how Hashem gives Moshe Rabbeinu a command to go and take revenge from the Midyanim who enticed the Jews to sin, causing a major plague. And Moshe Rabbeinu creates an army and sends them out. And when they come back with some possessions, some kelim, some vessels that belong to the goyim. And Elazar comes out and tells them the halacha of what they need to do with those vessels. And he tells them that anything that was made, anything that's gold, silver, copper, iron, tin, and lead, anything that went through a fire, that was used with a fire, you remove the non-kosher parts with fire, as we do on Pesach. Everyone's familiar that we kasher the kitchen fire with whatever came in through a certain type of fire. We take it out with that type of fire. V'taher, and it becomes tahar, and you put it in the mikvah. Anytime you take a keli, a vessel that belonged to a guy, and now it becomes into the possession of a Jew, it has to go to the mikvah. And if it went not through a direct fire, but it went through cooking, went through hagala, went through a rolling boil, went through boiling water, would also get kashered via hagala. And those are the halachot that we learn about, both at the kashering of libon and hagala, of blowtorching or using very high heat, and as well as hagala, using the hot water to kasher a non-kosher kitchen, or from chametz to Pesach. And we also learned the halachot about toveling, about putting in the mikvah kelim that we get from goyim. And so there's a concept here that when something comes from a possession of a goy, the fact is, even if you take a new keli, a new vessel from a goy, you still have to tovel it. You don't have to kasher it, but you have to tovel it. It's leaving the possession of a goy and it's coming to possession of a Jew. It has to get toveled. And if it belonged to a goy and they used it, now you have to kasher. You have to completely remove whatever treifas, whatever non-kosher things are in it. There's a story that's told that there was a rabbi. His name was Rav Chaim Zaid Shalita, and he was a prominent speaker in Eretz Yisrael from the Araychim organization. And in the summer of 5773, he was invited to speak at a Shabbaton for older single girls. And it was going to be attended by 26 unmarried women. And the youngest of the crowd was 30 years old. And he understood that, this is a lot of them are in a discouraged state, being single so long, they're trying to get married. And he wanted to give them hizuk, he wanted to be able to give them the strength, to give them the courage to move on, to continue to look, and to find their shidduch. So the day before he went to Jerusalem, he was going to Yerushalayim for this event, he went to visit the Chacham Rav David Abu Chatzer Shalita in Hariya. He was seeking advice on what to say to the girls. What can he tell them to give them hizuk, to make them feel better, to make them continue to try and to get married. Rav David looked at him, Rav David Abu Chatzer looked at him, and he said, this is what you're going to tell the girls. Tell these single women that they must rid themselves of their contaminated handheld devices if they wish to become engaged. Rav Chaim says, I was literally stunned when the Chacham, Rav David Abu Chatzer, told me this. These girls weren't the, overly religious type of girls. There were a lot of professionals in there. And he thought that if he would tell them this, they might look at it as juvenile. They might look at it as insulting. How is he to explain it to them? But David said, that's what you have to tell them. Friday evening came, the Shabbaton started, and Rav Chaim just didn't feel it was right to mention it. He couldn't bring himself to say it. He was scared that he would hurt them so quickly, so early on in the Shabbaton. And so they went through the whole Shabbat. He gave speeches. They had prayers. They had a very lively seudah, and they engaged him in discussion. And he felt that they were having a very spiritual, uplifting time. Finally, Shabbat was coming to an end, and he made Havdalah. And at that moment, Rav Chaim said to himself, it's now or never. He said, I just want to add one last thing as the Shabbaton is coming to an end. I believe it's something that will be quite beneficial. He said, on Thursday, the day before I came here to Yerushalayim, I went to visit the Chacham Rav David Abuchatzeir Shlita. And I asked, what message should I give? He told me to let you know that if you're willing to get rid of your smartphones, the contaminated devices, he assures that you will all see salvation in your quest to become engaged. The room was silent. Rav Chaim feared that the older girls would ridicule him and reject his words. He was concerned that the good feelings that he built over Shabbat, all the spiritual uplifting, would disappear. What he didn't expect was their reaction. After a moment of thick silence, one woman stepped forward and placed her iPhone on the table. Immediately, more and more women came forth and carefully put the devices down on the table. Their faces registered pure emunah in the words of the Chacham, and some of them even looked relieved to be doing something worthwhile to help themselves. And it took a while, but after an hour, 25 out of the 26 women had given up their smartphone, and their joy and happiness was for everyone to see. All but one girl held on to her iPhone. Rav Chaim thought it was impossible that even so many would give, and so he was happy with what he got. He took all those phones, he placed it into a shopping bag. He blessed them with luck and atzlacham, and took leave of the group. He just loaded his family and belongings into his car when the final woman, number 26, came running out to the car. Here, she said with a smile, count me in. She took her smartphone and gave it to Rav Chaim. Rav Chaim was so amazed. He felt that he must share it with the Chacham right away. He traveled to Nahariya and brought the bag of smartphones in front of Rav David. Rav David Abuchatzeir literally moved to tears at the sight of it. He was so emotional that he immediately announced, I wish to bless these girls, that they all become engaged by Tu B'Av. A tzaddik's words cut straight through to heaven, and one by one, the girls all got engaged. By Tisha B'Av, 25 girls became Kalas. The only one who would not become a Kala was a young lady who needed extra time to give up her phone. And she did become a Kala. 5 more days. On the night of Tu B'Av, she became engaged to her Basheret. And so, I think that from this story, from the Pasuk, we see of how important it is for us to understand that there is whatever is not Jewish is not supposed to be in our hands. And if we need it for some reason, they have to go through a purging. You have to get rid of the trefut, you have to get rid of the non-kosher parts of it in order to use it. If it comes from non-kosher sources, it has to be tovel. It has to go through a purification process. We have to understand that we are separated, that we are not the same, that we are meant to be holier, and it comes with a lot of responsibility. And as such, we must make sure that what we're doing is really L'Shem Shemayim. They're all very good organizations that help people with putting filters in their homes, on their phones. And it's something that everyone must understand that is needed. And if you don't have it up until now is the time to do it. You have to purify. We need those things. We need those technologies in this world. We need it. We're accustomed to it. That doesn't mean you can just use it any way you want. It has to be done in the proper way. Let's move on to another lesson from this week's Parashah. In this week's Parashah, we learn that Shevet Gad and Shevet Reuven, they want to stay on the other side of the Jordan, on the Ever Hayarden, the Trans-Jordan, because they have a lot of animals. And they want to graze. They want their animals to graze on those lands where there's a lot of space. Moshe Rabbeinu, as soon as he hears their request that they want to stay without even listening to the full details, immediately starts to rebuke them. Tells them, don't you remember what happened to the people who were crying and said we can't go into Eretz Yisrael, and to all the bad things that happened. Moshe Rabbeinu is really rebuking them. How could you not want to go into Eretz Yisrael? Moshe Rabbeinu, usually so calm, so patient, so understanding, even the most difficult of times, finds merit for the Jewish people. And all of a sudden, at this point, Moshe Rabbeinu becomes very upset and angry and rebukes Shevet Gad and Shevet Reuven. Moshe reacts totally different to what appears to be a simple question. Rav Mordechai Kamenetsky shares a story that lends some insight into why Moshe Rabbeinu took such an approach. There was a young Jew by the name of David, and he was driving to the Catskills for Shabbat, but he ended up setting out from his Manhattan office with not enough time to make the trip. Traffic was backed up on the Major Deegan, and crossing the Hudson via the George Washington Bridge seemed an almost impossible task. Mid-span, after sitting nearly an hour in stop-and-go traffic, he realized that the red orb in the sky, the sun, was about to sink below the horizon. He had never mehalel Shabbat. He had never desecrated the Shabbat before. And traffic on the George Washington Bridge was not going to make him violate the Shabbat now. So in a panic, he pulled his car as close as he could to the guardrail, left the keys on the visor, removed his wallet, and hid it together with his personal effects and hoped for the best. At worst, the car would be stolen. Maybe the police would get to it first and tow it. Feeling a little guilty about adding to the traffic delays on the bridge, David left his car, flashers blinking, and walked back towards New York City, where he felt he would spend Shabbat at a friend of his who lived in nearby Washington Heights. Saturday night, Masei Shabbat, he goes back to the bridge, and his car was nowhere to be seen. He went to the closest police precinct and asked for the desk officer. Did anyone see the gray Honda that was on the George Washington Bridge on Friday night? The officer's eyes widened. You mean the car with the keys on the visor? David nodded. Frankie, get over here, the cop yelled to his friend. Listen to this. By now, a couple of officers moved closer to David. The sergeant raised his voice. You mean the Honda with the flashers on? Again, David nodded. Yes. You mean the Honda with the wallet with close to $500 left under the front seat? Was that your car? David shook his head. Yes, officer. That's my car. Where is it? And now the officer got upset. Where is it? Where is it? Do you know how many divers we have looking for you right now in the Hudson? You see, Moshe Rabbeinu understood that the worst of all sins is not the one that one does privately in his heart or in his home, but rather when his actions affect the spirit of others. Sometimes our self-interest takes away any thought of how our conduct will be perceived and affected by others. The children of Gad and Reuven had a personal issue. They didn't want to cross the Jordan. They wanted to have their animals graze in the greener pastures on the Ever HaYarden. Yet they didn't realize that the effect of their request may have on the entire nation. They didn't take the severe ramifications of what would happen when everyone else hears that two Shvatim do not want to go into the Holy Land. In our lives, at home and at work, not everything that we do, say, or act upon may be interpreted with the intent that motivated the action. Just because I want to do something the way I think it is doesn't mean people will see it that way. And if someone sees it and understands it the wrong way and gets a bad feeling, bad attitude, or learns something incorrect from there, how terrible it can be. Our job is to be conscious that everything we do affects not only ourselves, but also be a bridge to many other people. I would like to look at one more lesson from this same area, from the same scene in the Parashah. Moshe Rabbeinu rebuked Bnei Reuven. He rebuked Bnei Gad. But Bnei Reuven had a very good intention why they wanted their animals to graze and pasture on the Ever HaYarden. They were afraid of Gezel. They were afraid to steal. They felt that if they would live closer to the other Shvatim, and they had so many animals, the animals would end up grazing in other Jewish people's lands. Therefore they said, let us stay here in this Yarden, where there's plenty and plenty of space for them to graze freely and not come to chashash of Gezel, of the concern of stealing. The question is, where did they learn this midah of being so careful, this character trait, being so careful about stealing? The Midrash says, you want to know where they got it from? They got it in their bones due to the chinuch, the teaching of Reuven, the son of Yaakov. The pasuk says, the person should teach a child according to their way, because when they get older, it won't leave them. Where do we see this character trait by Reuven? The Midrash says that when Reuven went out to get the famous dudain, those flowers that he brought home, it says he went out to the field. A field, a complete place of hefker. Doesn't belong to anyone. He didn't want to take it from someone else's house or someone else's field or garden. He took it from a freestanding field. Didn't belong to anybody. And it was this lesson that Reuven passed on to his children. What do we see from this midrash? We see a big yesod, a big foundation, a big principle in child education. We see that the way we live today will affect not only our children, but will have an everlasting impact for future generations to come, both for good and for bad. The Alta of Slobodka said, a person is not born a thief. How can it happen that a Jew becomes a thief? How does it happen? The Alter explained, it happened slowly. The grandfather found some halachic loophole to cheat, and the child picked up on it, and he was mosef veholech. He continued to add to it. It wasn't completely asur. He found a heter. It was a time like this, it was a time like that. Comes the third generation, and the child cannot differentiate between what's completely asur and what's okay, or what's, loopholes. And he starts to, Rahman al-Islam, start to swindle the world left and right. And that's the way it's passed down. If a person, on the other hand, makes it his business to learn every day, makes it his business that the children see him learn every day, his family knows that whatever happens, his learning cannot be missed. He raises a family that's machshav Torah, that understand the importance of Torah. Torah will always remain utmost importance in their eyes. If a child sees a mother take care of the mitzvah of tzniut, the child will have a different appreciation for tzniut. The honesty and integrity that a child witnesses in his parents' home will stick with them. It's important to realize that what we do, the actions that we make, that's where the children are learning from. And that's what will make all the difference in the upbringing of this child. There's a very well-known story that can't go by without mention. The Ridvaz, who was the Rav in Tzefat, came to shul early on the day of his father's yahrzeit. When the mitpalalim came into shul, they found the Ridvaz crying while leaning on his shtender. When asked why he was crying, the Ridvaz answered that it was his father's yahrzeit, and he remembered something from his youth that made him realize how much his parents had done for him. His father hired a tutor for him, and he was supposed to pay the tutor a ruble a month. And at one point, he wasn't able to pay the melamed for 2 months. Business was bad. But that day in shul, a gevir, a rich man, said he wanted a furnace. The Ridvaz's father was a furnace builder, but there was a shortage in supply. And so this rich man said, anyone who can build me a furnace will get 5 rubles. His father went home, spoke to the mother, and they decided that they would take apart their own furnace, which was their only source of heat and fire to cook food with, and sell it to the rich man in order to pay for their son's melamed, their son's teacher. They took it apart brick by brick and sold it. And they sent the 5 rubles to the melamed, to the teacher, saying that it was payment for the past 2 months and for the next 3 months in advance. And the Ridvaz realized how that action itself led him to love more and more the Torah. The Panovich Rav was asked how he had the kohot, the power, the energy to build a yeshiva when everyone thought the world was coming to an end and the Nazis were coming closer to Eretz Yisrael. And the Panovich Rav said, it's all due to my mother. My mother was an almana, was a widow, the Panovich Rav said. She was poor, as one can possibly imagine. And the family owned only 1 set of winter clothes. And the Panovich Rav had himself and 2 brothers. Winters got really cold. The cold Russian winter nights, winter days, reaching temperatures below 0 degrees. And everyone expected that the Panovich family would just stay at home, trying to weather out the winter. But no, his mother, the Panovich Rav said, would not have it. She said, I'm not going to have my children staying home and wasting away, not learning anything, not coming closer to Torah. And so she took that 1 set of clothes, 1 set of winter clothes, the coat, the gloves, the scarf. She put it on 1 child, carried him to the yeshiva, herself not wearing any winter clothing. Then came back, and soon as she took the clothes that she came to the yeshiva, she took off the coat, the sweater, the scarf, brought it back home, dressed up the 2nd child, and brought him to the yeshiva, and did it a 3rd time. People said, you're crazy. You're going to make your children orphans from their mother also. But she said, no, I cannot have them not learn Torah. The Panovich Rav said, it was my mother who gave me the strength to build the yeshiva. To us children, she never said a word. But we saw her courage, we saw her bravery. And that put the most important belief into us, into our souls. There's no concept of it being too hard to learn Torah. You can always learn Torah, no matter how hard or how bad it looks or what else is going on in the world. Our children learn from us, and we are teaching them. What are we teaching them? In this week's Parshat, we've seen how important it is to look at the ramifications of our actions. to the world at large, and especially to our children, as what we do will affect them. We learn the importance of separating and differentiating ourselves from the world and making sure that everything we have is purged from any means of contamination, any means of trefut. And Be'ezat Hashem, with these lessons and applying them into our lives, may we see our Yeshuot, our salvations, how much tragedy has befallen the Jewish people, how much lessons we have to learn from them. Be'ezat Hashem, we should see the salvation. It's coming Tisha B'Av. We should see Mashiach, and Tisha B'Av should turn into a day of happiness, a day where we return completely to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Mashiach doesn't mean just to lose your problems, not to have any more problems. Yeah, you won't have any more physical, worldly problems. But Mashiach means that we have the ability to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu without any other concerns, without anything else. We should be able to be zocheh to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Beit HaMikdash, Bikarov Mamash. Shabbat Shalom Lekulam.